My family disowned me. They're shaming me. They're saying, hey, I stole a $200,000 ring, and I know that's not true. I would never do that, and I'm going to prove who did it in the family. People ought to know that there will always be consequences for actions. You can't just live your life anyhow and wake up one morning with the claim that your past actions will no longer matter. I come from an average family, 4 kids, 2 girls and 2 boys. I'm the firstborn and son. I've always had the best interest of my family at heart, and that was why even after I graduated as an architect, I took on several menial jobs just to help support the family. I was doing that while trying to start up my construction firm. The firm was registered, but I did not have the connections or relationships to get me contracts, so I kept changing jobs while hoping for something better. My younger brother, Louis, finished college 2 years later, and he did not waste time looking for a job. He just brought a lady back home and told us that he intended to get married to her in just a few months' time. I knew the girl my brother introduced to the family. Her name was Julie, and she was from a very wealthy family. I doubted his love for her because I'd heard him boast several times about grooming a woman who was going to be his ticket out of poverty. I knew the reason he wanted to get married to Julie was to tie her down. Poor Julie. She had fallen madly in love with my brother, and she was excited at the prospect of spending her life with him. I knew it was very wrong to get married to a lady simply because it guaranteed your happiness, but I kept my opinions to myself. I expected my parents to say the right things to Louis, and they initially did. My father rebuked him in the presence of Julie for suggesting marriage when he had just gotten out of school and still had a long way to go forward, securing his financial future. They sent Julie out of the house after telling both of them that they were not in support of any marriage because Louis was not ready. Louis always asked Julie to give him a few days to convince our parents to let them get married. Louis later met with my parents and told them his reason for insisting he was ready for marriage. He told them that they were planning to start up a business for him after the marriage. The business he talked about was something that required big money, and when my parents asked how would they get the money, he said it was going to be done by Julie's parents. He did not need to talk much about Julie's parents besides making mention of their names. You see, Julie's parents are business moguls who have made a name in real estate in our area. My parents, who were surprised, immediately asked my brother to bring back Julie to come and see them. My parents made sure that the whole family prepared for Julie's coming. It was like the daughter of the president was in town. Julie came, and my parents apologized to her for the way that they treated her. They said that they had initially objected to the marriage because they felt that their son did not have the adequate resources to meet her needs after marriage. But they now understood that there would be zero financial need before, during, and after the marriage. Julie was in love, and did not let my parents dwell on apologizing. They asked her if her parents were aware and just replied yes. A meeting was fixed where the two families would meet, and it was my family that went to Julie's place. The reception was received that day. It was grand, and Julie's parents did not seem like the kind of rich folk who use their riches to oppress people. We talked for a while, and they noted that the financial background of their daughter's suitor did not matter to them as much as the heart of the man. They stated that they just wanted somebody who would love and cherish their daughter, who had dealt with some form of anxiety and stress disorder in the past. I felt pained while listening to my would-be in-laws speak. They were good people, and their daughter deserved somebody who would love her unconditionally. This was something I was not sure my brother was offering. Louis immediately talked about how he wanted to get married to Julie, not because of what she had, but who she was. He went on to give a good speech that impressed Julie's parents. Her parents gave their consent, and preparation for the wedding began. My parents were super excited to be connected to Julie's parents through the marriage of their kids, and Julie's parents took charge of the wedding expenses. The wedding took place, and it was the absolute talk of the town. My brother's in-laws had given their daughter and her husband, my brother, wedding celebration rings which cost around $3,000 each. The better part of the alliance started almost immediately with Julie's parents turning the lives of everybody in my family around. They started with my brother Louis, and after they had sponsored his wedding and honeymoon to the Maldives, they gave him a huge amount of money, which he refused to disclose the amount. To start up his business, of course. He was living his best life. They assisted my parents and sisters financially, and it got up to my turn, and I was invited to their home 6 months after we became in-laws. I got there, and my brother-in-laws engaged me in a lengthy conversation. They wanted to know my educational qualification and the plans which I had for myself. After learning that I was an architect with a registered construction company that had handled 0 projects, they asked me to leave, but promised to get me back soon. I went home and kept my fingers crossed as I waited for my brother-in-laws to get back to me as promised. It took them 2 full weeks, but they finally reached out to me. I got to their home, and the first thing they said to me was that I resigned from every job I was doing. They said that they had a huge expanse of land that they wanted developing to an estate and were willing to work with me if I assured them I was capable of handling the project. I began giving my brother-in-laws every manner of assurance which they needed. They asked me to prepare the building plans and make a budget for the contract, and it took me 3 months to prepare the plan and budget. The plan was good, but the budget, however, was what I felt would deter them. To my amazement, they went through with the plan and the budget and told me that they were willing to work with me. They noted that the money would be paid into my account within 2 weeks, and this was the breakthrough of my life. The profit that I would realize from the contract would ensure that I never starved for the next 5 years, even if I didn't work. Well, the other part of the working with and for the in-laws that got me excited was the fact that it could open up more opportunities for me. I mean, a powerful couple like them would be equally have rich and powerful friends whom they could refer to me for construction work. I called Louis and told them what his in-laws had done, and he asked me to come down to his house so we could celebrate my big win over a bottle of wine. I must confess that though I had not been at ease with the prospect of Louis getting married to Julie, I was happy it was beneficial to me. I got home, and my entire family was happy for me. Things, however, went sour 3 days later when I was summoned by my brother-in-laws, and the tone of their voice was harsh. I quickly got to their house and saw my brother and his wife equally seated there. I was uncomfortable the moment I got in because it was as though my presence caused tension in the air. I greeted the in-laws, but they did not respond. They just noted that they would no longer proceed with the contract, and I was shocked. I'd made plans of what I would do with the profit from the contract, and I could not settle with them dashing my hopes to the ground. I asked them what had gone wrong, and they said that they could not work with somebody who had a questionable character. I asked what I had done wrong, and my younger brother Louis immediately called me a thief and asked me to quit putting up an act. I began searching on the inside to know what wrong I had done, because the last time I was with him, we were sharing a drink and he was happy for me. Louis asked how he had offended me to deserve that kind of treatment that I had given to him. The more Louis spoke, the more confused I became. My brother-in-law immediately demanded that I provide Louis wedding rings in less than 3 days or they would make my life miserable. I looked at Louis the moment his in-laws mentioned the $200,000 wedding rings, and he verbally attacked me. He said I'd stolen his wedding ring on the day that we shared a bottle of wine at his home. My head almost exploded at what I heard. How and why in the world could he come up with such an accusation? Things had grown from good to worse, and I asked him what proof he had that I'd stolen the ring. He told me I was the last person he met that day, and the next morning he could not find it. He even shamed me and told me the reason I might have stolen the rings was because I was broke. My brother-in-laws were powerful people, and I knew that they had the resources to make my life miserable. I left the house that day with the clock ticking against me. How could I provide something which was never in my possession? Even if I wanted to use my money to replace it, where could I get such a large amount of cash? I went straight home to tell my parents what happened, and the goal was to get them to convince my brother to drop the allegations and equally get me back in my brother-in-law's good books. My parents and sisters were all waiting for me. The story of my alleged thievery had gotten to them, and the treatment I received at my brother-in-law's place was nothing compared to what was waiting for me back home. The first thing that came out of their mouth was a question, and they wanted to know why I decided to turn the good fortune of our family around. I began explaining to them that I was innocent of all the allegations levied against me, but my family, who practically worshipped my brother's in-laws at this point, was not willing to accept whatever explanation I was giving. They claimed my detestable action was traceable to the jealousy I felt from the very first day I learned that my brother was getting married to a lady from a rich background. My family said that they would not only take me off their hands and let my brother-in-laws deal with me, but they would equally, quote, throw me under the bus. I was stuck. There was nothing I could do other than wait for my brother-in-laws to carry out their threat. The next few days saw my parents mounting pressure on me to bring out the ring before my time was up. I was treated like an outcast, and the third day arrived, and it was Lewis who paid a visit to the house with his wife Julie. He came to tell me that he had spoken with his in-laws and pleaded on my behalf just to let the matter slide. They accepted his plea, but noted that they would no longer have anything to do with me. I asked Lewis why he had falsely accused me, and my family immediately called me ungrateful. He said that rather than thanking my younger brother for sparing me the shame, I was still trying to claim innocence. It did not make sense to me how my world came crashing overnight, but I could tell that my brother Lewis had a hand in it, or possibly knew about it. My family members did not let the matter slide, even though Lewis said that he had asked my in-laws to let them off the hook. They unanimously asked me to move out of the house and stay far away from them. The reason for the decision was that being in a close relationship with me would threaten their relationship with Julie's family. This was an indirect way of letting me know that I was less important than them, than money and privileges that they were getting. I left my family and decided to try to survive on my own. It was not easy, but I did it. I kept my distance and minded my business till about 4 years later, when Lewis was making headlines with his in-laws. You see, Lewis was dragging both his rich in-laws and their daughter. The in-laws were influential people, so their daily affairs would be public knowledge, and Lewis used this to his advantage. He claimed that his in-laws were trying to compel him into spending the rest of his days with their daughter, who was mentally unstable. There was no kind of ugly name that he did not call Julie and her parents. I'm telling you, the slandering was bad. According to Lewis, his in-laws had deceived him by hiding certain medical conditions of their daughters, which, according to Lewis, began surfacing late into their marriage. I knew Lewis was just trash-talking. He was simply tired of Julie and was trying to force himself out of the marriage. I was there when he professed unconditional love to Julie, in the presence of her parents, who noted that she had suffered from stress disorder and anxiety, and that was way before he met her. Lewis twisted the whole narrative to mean she was not mentally sound, and had even attacked him with a knife in their matrimonial home while he was asleep, a claim his in-laws had publicly refuted. His in-laws noted that their daughter had caught her husband cheating on her, and she brought the matter to the notice, which led to their intervention, and that's when Lewis asked for a divorce with a 50% share of what he and Julie owned. The in-laws further stated publicly that they refused to let a gold digger like Lewis rip their daughter's wealth apart, and that was when he promised to ensure that he dragged their name through the mud. Well, I believed them. My question was this: why did this madness wait for 4 years after Lewis had enjoyed the wealth of his in-laws before it manifested? This folk had set up a business for him, and he was tired of acting like he genuinely loved their daughter. He knew if he admitted to adultery, he could leave the marriage with nothing. After a while, though, Julie's parents, who were tired of the whole drama, decided to let Lewis have the divorce that he wanted on his terms. The divorce was concluded, and Lewis enjoyed his loot from the family. It's been 4 years since Lewis had his divorce, and it's been 8 years since I've not heard from my family. Well, I've heard from them yesterday, right? They showed up at my house yesterday, 8 years later, and I'm still wondering how they even got my address. I was taking a nap when my wife said a couple who claimed to be my parents were asking about me. Yeah, I got to let you know that I'm currently married and have a son. I got to the parlor and it was my parents. They were not looking as robust as they were 8 years ago, but my parents wanted me to come meet Lewis at the hospital. They spoke with a sense of urgency, but I questioned what they were doing in my life. They ignored my question and said that my brother Lewis was at the hospital and had requested to make peace with me. They said that he had a near-death experience while overdosing, and he was in the healing phase, which involved making peace with me. I was on the verge of kicking them out, but I decided to probe a bit further to make sense of what this healing phase was and why I was needed. My parents said that some religious folk have covered the hospital bills for Lewis, who was their most recent convert, and were willing to help him, and the family had noted that making peace with his past was essential to moving forward. From what my parents said, it was clear that Lewis was currently broke. It now made a little sense to me. Lewis wanted somebody to take care of his financial burden, and he was willing to play religious just so that these folk would, become responsible for him. I immediately kicked my parents out after telling them that both they and Lewis were not my family. My wife, who had never met my family, has been trying to get me to reach them, but her pleas have been left on deaf ears. Update number 1. I don't mean to be offensive, but these religious people are one of the most gullible people you would ever find in this lifetime. They're willing to use charitable means to gather converts, and that's why swindlers like my brother and family would always take advantage of them. My parents came back to my house, and they came with their religious buddies. I was still at the construction firm where I worked at when my wife called to inform me of the situation. I told her to immediately call the cops to come get them arrested, and she began pleading with me to not be so irrational. My wife talked about me being irrational. It was because I had yet to open up to her about why I got married to her without her ever meeting any of my family members. I knew she was not going to kick them out, so I just overstayed at my workplace to make sure that they would have left by the time I got home. I got to my house around 7 p.m., and to my disgust, these guys were still seated comfortably on my couch with my parents. I tried to be polite to the religious guys by asking them to leave since I was too tired to see them, but they said that they would just not take much of my time. I told them I could spare 5 minutes of my time, but after which me and my family would need our privacy. And the person who seemed to be the leader began to speak. He began quoting passages from the Bible that talked about forgiveness and peace, and he then said that he had accompanied my parents to come and mend the relationship between me and my family. I didn't know what lies my family would have sold to them by now, but mending a relationship was out of context. Only broken things can be mended, but there was no relationship between me and my family to start with. I told the preacher that I no longer identified and did not want to identify with them, with what used to be my family, because I was of no value to them. I told this preacher that it would be in his and his religious circle's best interest to avoid my brother and family, as they would only end up taking them for granted. This ignorant preacher, who did not know my family like I did, began quoting places from the Bible about how somebody bad could turn out to be great. He said that it was when he and his circle had reached out to my family and gotten close to them that they realized my parents had another son somewhere. He vowed that my family members, especially my brother, have been filled with sorrow about how I was treated ever since the day that they preached to them on the need for peace and family unity, and that was why my family was reaching out to me. Proof of their genuine repentance and sorrow. As the preacher spoke, I looked at my parents, who seemed like they were genuinely sorry, but I told the preacher that though I was not against his belief, my brother and family only changed because it was convenient to them. I politely asked the preacher to leave my home and take my parents along as it was getting late. The preacher pleaded with me to think it over what he had said before making any decision. I promised to do so, but that was me just trying to be dismissive. I was going to forget about it the moment that they left. Update number 2. I finally met with the one, my brother, who was seeking peace, and this was not because my parents had brought up the religious guys to my house. Absolutely not the reason. It was simply because my wife had persuaded me. Even though I told her about how my brother had wronged me, I waited for a week when I was sure Lewis was at home and I had them set up a meeting. I came alone to the family house as I did not want my so-called family anywhere around my home. I got to the house just to confirm that Lewis was who I had known was unchanged. Lewis went on his knees and began asking for forgiveness, and anyone would think he was sincere, anybody but me. I asked him in the presence of everyone there why he would have wrongly accused me of stealing his expensive wedding ring, and thereby ruining my relationship with Julie's parents, and Lewis said that he was involved in a reckless lifestyle behind the scenes, and he had pawned off the ring during one of his escapades when he was gambling. He used what was left of it to pay for drugs and hookers. He then went on to say that all of that was in the past and he's a changed person now. I immediately got angry. What did he mean by being a changed person? After ruining my life and the lives and images of Julie and her parents, he was not just now talking about it all being in the past? I looked at the leader of the religious group, nodding his head as Lewis said that he was a changed man. Did these guys think that the action that were carried out in the past would have no future implications because of a claim that one was now changed? I asked if he had sought the forgiveness of his ex-wife and her family, who he had slandered before the public, and Lewis claimed that he had tried reaching out to them, but they did not grant him any audience. Everything in me wanted to walk out of that place, but I still lacked the evidence to prove to the religious guys present that Lewis and my family were far from being changed, so I just played the game. I acted like I had forgiven Lewis, and we even shared a hug. The moment Lewis and I broke our embrace, he turned to his religious friends and said he felt light on the inside, as though a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulder. One of the people commented that Lewis was experiencing inner peace and healing. I immediately told Lewis that I would help him make peace with his ex-wife and her family, and Lewis accepted. I'm sure he did so because of the presence of the pastor, obviously, and that is his mistake. Update number 3. Hey guys. So, my wife now shares the same opinion with me that my brother and family were not fit to be in my life. After the whole forgiveness charade, I invited Lewis over to my home. We discussed his fight with Julie and her family, and I was able to get the truth out of him about the knife attack and the infidelity story. He opened up to me by saying that he liked Julie, but not to the point of spending his life with her. According to him, he felt caged in a marriage because he did not have the liberty to live how he wanted, as his in-laws were always prying into his business. Lewis admitted that he had done extremes and defaming Julie and her family, but started the whole changed person story again. Lewis confessed to me. It proved that the in-laws had been right all along, just as I suspected. This guy was nuts. How come he did not complain of a feeling caged when he was enjoying the financial benefits? I told Lewis that the reason his ex and her family had refused to grant him an audience was that they were probably hurt by the experience. I, however, proposed a solution, and it was that he issues a public apology to them, where he would admit his guilt and all. I was done talking, but Lewis immediately exclaimed. He said that a public confession and apology would give Julie and her family the proof that they needed to sue him after all these years. Lewis insisted that there was no need for what I was saying because it was in the past and he had no use of it anymore. He said he was okay with the new family, his religious brethren, which he found, and he did not want to raise any dust. One terrible thing about talking too much is the fact that you might not know when you'd set yourself up with your own words. Lewis had admitted to not wanting to make peace with Julie because he, quote, had no use for them. These cannot be the words of a changed person, truly, and I greatly suspected that he never reached out to them in the first place. Lewis thought I was a fool who had fallen for his repentance act, and I acted as though I understood what he was talking about, but I had been recording our conversation all along. I visited Julie's family the next day and they were initially hostile towards me. I mean, it's been 4 years since Lewis dragged their name through the mud, but time did not heal their hurt even though Julie is currently engaged. I told them that the purpose of my coming was not to make peace with them, but to help them get the justice they deserved. By the way, they confirmed that Lewis never reached out to them, and I handed over the recording of my conversation with Lewis and Julie's family, and they currently are working towards suing him for defamation. Update number 4. Lewis is supposed to have undertaken a religious ritual called baptism by next week, after which I believe his folks were willing to support him in starting up a business, but he just quit. He's no longer part of them. I invited my entire family to my home 3 days ago and asked that their pastor come along for what they had thought was a reunion. I claimed I wanted them to officially meet with my wife and son. A man who they were not familiar with was present, and I noted I would introduce him later on. After everybody gathered, I began making a speech about forgiveness, and somewhere along the lines I started talking about consequences. I told everyone present, everyone, that actions through the past could impact the future no matter how sorry one is. I mean, a married guy could be sorry to have cheated on his wife, but what if he caught an STD? Even something like AIDS? Does he become, a changed person, cure him of the disease? I looked to my brother's pastor and told him that my family, especially my brother, had hurt people in the past, and claiming to be changed does not roll the hurt away. I noted that it would have helped if he had changed, and I played the recording of my conversation for Lewis, for the pastor to hear. I wanted him to hear Lewis not wanting to offer a public apology to Julie, whom he publicly shamed because he no longer, quote, had use for her. Lewis, at the beginning of the forgiveness drama, had claimed to reach out to Julie and her family, but I told the pastor right there that it was a lie, and the only reason Lewis was acting changed was because they, the religious body, were willing to help a member live right, even if it meant helping out financially. I introduced a man who was present and unknown to them as Julie's lawyer. He informed Lewis that, in light of recent evidence that surfaced, aka the recording, Julie and her parents were being sued for defamation. Lewis looked at me and I smiled as he knew I was the one responsible for setting the whole thing up. I equally noted to my family that I have obtained a restraining order against them. I did not kick my family out of my house this time. I let my wife do it. I believe the reason why Lewis quit was because his pastor could now see him for who he truly was. So, he used the ring to sell it and gamble away the money and use it on women. Guys, I want to know your thoughts about this. It was pretty evident to me the entire time OP did not steal the ring, and tricking those religious people. Oh my goodness, guys, let me know your thoughts about this whole thing. Drop it down below in the comment section. Today's story was unique, it was different, and it was pretty much crazy. That's pretty obvious. My name's Mr. Reddito, if I haven't said that already, and if you guys are new to the channel, welcome. I do these sort of stories every single day, drama stories, so if you guys want more daily videos, go ahead, click that subscribe button. I'll see you tomorrow, and remember, it's cool to be kind. Peace.